Kia ora. The text today is John's story in chapter 6 about a multitude of people being hungry and a little boy coming and bringing to Jesus 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. And I choose to read this story as about a child who fed God. You can choose to read it, of course, quite differently than that. As with all stories about Jesus, this text is a painting, an image, an imagining, based maybe on an oral or received tradition, then adapted and shaped to address a particular community with its particular needs, making particular points. With this gospel, commonly called John's Gospel or the fourth gospel, there is nothing historical. So Jesus did not say, I am the good shepherd, or I am the light of the world, or I am the way, the truth, and the life, nor anything else in this book. Rather, this is a painting by a very talented artist who was part of what scholars call the Johannine community around the end of the 1st and into the early 2nd century, some 70 plus years after Jesus died. And the paints on his palette come from oral and written sources, the experience of his community, and the circumstances of his time. And he creates a kerygma, a preached word, a message, an image that speaks. Some of the paints he had on his palette come from stories about Elijah and Elisha, like in our first reading today from 2 Kings 4. That's why at the end of our passage, John has the people say, this is indeed the prophet, as in Elijah, Elisha. Indeed, if you read the stories of Elijah and Elisha, you'll find most of the miracles later ascribed to Jesus. Think paints, palettes, paintings. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Thomas are paintings created for their days with some splashes of color from earlier days. You can choose to read this feeding story as part of a sermon about communion, with its references to the Passover and to taking, giving thanks, and distributing. You may have smiled when the painter put Passover, Festival of the Jews. An explanatory note that is nonsense that comes from Jesus' time, but of course not nonsense to his non-Jewish audience. Or when you saw that about Passover, you might have grimaced, for we know that this gospel became a source book for Christian anti-Semitism. You can choose to then take this kerygma of feeding a multitude and hold it up beside our contemporary communion practices and play spot the difference. Like, where is the wine back then? And how come we don't pass around fish today? Like, did anyone check the baptism status or the communion cards or the membership status, all those people on the hillside before they had a feed? Like, how come today we just get a scrap of bread and a sip of juice? Well, they had a decent meal. And like, maybe the challenge of communion is not about choosing to participate in a rite of personal holiness, but is a challenge about what we do with what we've got in order to feed a needy world. Maybe the next time we meet for communion, we should each bring a supermarket bag, like that one, full of what the PSN food bank needs. And we can make together at least 12 or 24 baskets full to share. Maybe in organizing that, each of us shopping for goods to share, arranging delivery to the food bank afterwards. Maybe these things are the preparatory and subsequent disciplines of a holy, sacred communion. You can also read this story as Jesus, the Superman from off the planet, doing his saving thing. The eternal Logos come to earth. Jesus the divine. Jesus the Son of God. He who makes bread miraculously expand and form in his hands. This is the way it was presented to me way back in Sunday school. Feeding the multitude was a miracle wrought by God, then and now. We might, like the boy with the 5 loaves and 2 fish, bring what we have to share, but it's Jesus who does the magic. It's great magic done by a great Jesus who is the great divine Logos. To get some magic, we need to believe that and all that and all that. It is this gospel, the 4th John's, that paints Jesus in super God colors. All-knowing, all-powerful, supreme. It's this Jesus that seems to take everything, including this crucifixion, in his stride. It is this Jesus about whom we wonder, is he really human at all? Human like us? Or does he have a get-out-of-jail-free card in his wallet when it comes to suffering? It is this Jesus that makes some theologians refute Scripture as an absolute norm. For the norm of this gospel has Jesus portrayed as something akin to the Marvel superheroes gallery. The problem with the superhero genre is that it locates God as supersized and beyond, to whom we relate through emissaries. Emissaries, representatives on earth, popes, bishops, ministers, kings, emperors, governors, fathers in God, both sacred and secular. And it is these representatives who mediate the miracles. They exercise control of what is said to be God's doings and what is not. Authority comes down from on high. And we must be obedient if we are to receive any benefit, like bread. Such a reading would have the multitude on the hillside all accepting the lordship, divinity of Jesus from that day forth and following him. Such a reading would have us first and foremost believing the miracle and miracle worker, rather than doing the miracle and being the miracle worker. I choose to read this gospel text today as a story of a child who fed God. I choose to read it as a parable, one that didn't happen but can always happen. It begins with a need. Jesus is on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, Syrophoenicia, not Galilee. And a multitude of foreigners seek him out, lots of people who are hungry. They might want to see healing miracles or hear from the learned rabbi from over the lake, but right now they're hungry. The story is not about spiritual need, but physical need. And Philip the foil gives a correct accountancy assessment as to both need and cost beyond the financial resources they have. Note there's no blaming in the story. No blaming of individuals. I mean, who goes up a mountain for a day without any food? No blaming of parents or communities or synagogues. No blaming of foreigners or accountants. No blaming of local government, provincial government, the empire, or even Caesar. Not that all these were blameless. hunger, like poverty, like unemployment, like housing shortages, has multiple causes, from the unpredictability of climate to the predictability of greed, from the depletion of emotional and motivational resources of the many to the systems that favor the accruing of vast financial resources by the few. But in our story, blame doesn't feature. There's no talk of systemic structural change, which is not to say the Jesus movement were opposed to such change. Indeed, they're akin to anarchists. Rather, this story is local and specific. It's a painting about a child. It's about a painting of the magic of little. Our child was low, very low in the cultural hierarchy. The boy had to go through Jesus' minders. Kids didn't get to the front of the queue in those days. So an acknowledgement of the story's Andrew is important. Andrew facilitates the access of this boy to Jesus. Andrew sees the child not as a problem, not as pretentious, not as a nuisance. He simply sees the child as having a wish and is prepared to help it be granted, even if his fellow disciples disagree with him. I guess there must have been lots of people wanting access to Jesus. People wanted to touch him and be touched by him. People wanted to be healed in mind and body. Important people and needy people. A boy with a lunch to share wasn't, for most of the disciples, I guess, a priority. The boy offers his magic of little because he sees a need. And he wants to respond. Not by wishing the needy would go away or the needy would have planned ahead. Not by wishing that someone else would do something, but by doing something himself. Offering his little. His act of holy communion with a hungry community. 5 barley buns, 2 fishes. His act feeds God. I'm not talking, of course, about some anthropomorphic deity, supreme being of any size or shape. I'm talking about an understanding of God as the power between and within human beings that joins with us, flows within us as we make love and justice in the world. A power by which we empower others, a renewable energy in which we participate, that lights us up so we can light others up. I'm talking about a small g God that needs us, needs to be fed by us, so together we can make God, mutual transforming relationships in the world. This is what the mystics meant when they used the phrase about us giving birth to God. Sister Ilia Dalio says, Christian life is a commitment to love, to give birth to God in one's own life, and to become midwives of divinity in this evolving cosmos. Or Annie Dillard, we always find God in our lives as Jesus was found in Bethlehem at Christmas, a helpless infant in the straw who must be picked up and nurtured into adulthood. So, this boy, in making an offering to feed the hungry, feeds, succors God, hope, mutuality into being. He cooperates with God to feed God and expand this life and light-giving goddishness, energy of grace, as does Jesus. And it is enough. The need is met by enough. May we share our little and know when we have enough. Blessings to you this week.